Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Psalm 95, Worship and Warning. We begin, again, there's no superscription in this section, quite a few psalms with no superscriptions, and so the psalm itself begins, O come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. A second invitation, let us come. So we started with the come, now let us come before his presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to him with psalms. Now, notice that term psalms, biz mirot. The bi part is a preposition that's at the, we would say the word in or with. And then the oath ending makes it plural. That's the feminine plural. And the root word there is zamir. It's not the usual word for psalm. There's a different term, or it's not the usual word for song either, but it really captures both those ideas. You know, sometimes you have what are called synonyms, where you just have another word that means essentially the same thing. So Psalms works, although it would have been nice if we could pick maybe a different word. I don't know, melody. I'm not sure what would be a good synonym, a better translation. So I'm going to go with this. Now, what we have then is the call to worship. It's almost like a double call, "Oh, come," and then he says in verse 2, "Let us come." And now we go to verse 3, we're going to see the reason for worship. And we begin in verse 3, "For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods." You know, whether you're looking at pagan gods or kings or any, God is number one. He's bigger than all of that. And then we have the description of that, in what way he is bigger, starting in verse 4, in whose hands are the depths of the earth. Now, the depths of the earth, think about what would be the deepest spot in the world. I guess you could, go to somewhere where they've dug a deep hole, a mine or something like that. And they had such things back then. So the depths of the earth could be maybe a cave. Although if you go, we know that if you go down to the shores of the Dead Sea, you're on the lowest spot, aside from maybe digging down deeper, you're on the lowest natural spot in the world. The Dead Sea is today, it's 1,400 feet below sea level. Even back then, it was 1,200 feet below sea level. Or you can go the alternative, latter part of verse 4, the peaks of the mountains are his also. So go down to the deepest spot or go up to the highest spot. And those are, God is the God in all those places. Verse 5, you go from the height and the depth to the faraway places. The sea is his. It is he who made it. And if you're in Israel, to go to the sea, you go to the west, and in that direction is all sea. In fact, the term for sea, yam, was also their term for west, at least one of the terms. But not only the sea, notice, and his hands formed the dry land. So whether it's land and sea, one direction or the other direction, the height, the depth, all of it is in the hands of God. So verse 6, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. And so we have this call again. We started with a call to worship, and then we looked at the reason for worship. Now we come to another call to worship, to bow down, to kneel. Those are all ways that we do worship. These are all, what would be the right term for that? Um, these are all postures. Can I call it that? Whether it's bowing down or kneeling, postures of worship. And so what we have here is a second call to worship. So we had a call to worship, a reason for worship, a second call to worship. Now we're going to have a second reason for worship, first part of verse 7. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. And so worship is appropriate, not only just demanded, it's just the appropriate thing to do, because he is God and we're not. Because he is God, we are the ones that he made. We are the ones that he has cared for. We are his. Here it describes both the people of his pasture, the sheep of his hand. Pastors and sheep sort of go together. But now we come in the last section of verse 7. Notice, today if you would hear his voice. And this is going to introduce, with this today, it introduces a warning. So we had worship. That was the first half of the psalm. We're already through that. And now we go to the second half of the psalm, introduced by this today. This is bringing it up to speed now. And this introduces the warning. Today, if you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, as in the days of Massah in the wilderness. When your fathers tested me, they tried me, though they had seen my work. Now, the reference to Meribah and Massah are two place names that were familiar to the readers of the psalm, the Jewish readers. This was part of their history about how they had first come out of Egypt. And Exodus chapter 17 tells the story. Came from Egypt, and they came to this place, Exodus chapter 17, verse 1. Then all the congregation of the sons of Israel journeyed by stages from the wilderness of Sin. And that's not sin like sinfulness, that's sin like Sinai. From the wilderness of Sin, according to the command of the Lord, and camped at a place called Rephidim. And there was no water for the people to drink. I've actually been to the Sinai, and fortunately, when I was there, we took water with us, or else we would have been very dry, very, very hot, very in trouble. And they come to this place, notice it's called Rephidim, no water. And we read verse 2, therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water that we may drink. And Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? And so Moses cried out to the Lord. And first, they cry out to him. He turns to the Lord, and he's not complaining to the Lord, but he's asking for instructions. What shall I do to this people? A little more, and they will stone me. It was about to turn deadly. They were ready to strike Moses and kill him. And so we read in verse 5, then the Lord said to Moses, pass before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile. That same staff he'd also used to strike the Red Sea. And remember, the sea had split and the Nile had done all sorts of things. And go, behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb. Now, Horeb's another word for Sinai, but they're at a rock in that area. And you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, so that the people may drink. And what's going on is they're ready to strike Moses and kill him. And God says, you're going to strike the rock. Now, the rock is going to represent the place where God is. You're going to sort of symbolically strike me. Think about that. Moses is going to strike God. He's going to symbolically kill God. Not that you can kill God, but he'll strike the rock and water will come out of it. Water comes from the stricken rock. Can I say it symbolically? Water comes from the stricken God and brings that which provides the answer to the thirst of the people. And Moses does it. And sure enough, it happens. And water comes forth and the people drink and everything is good. Now, verse 7, here's why we came to this passage. He named the place Massah and Meribah. Now, Massah comes from the root word nasa, and it just means nasa means to test. So it's like the place of testing. We're going to see this in the rest of the verse. And he also names it, it's like a double name, Massah and Meribah. And the term Meribah comes from that central part, the reed part in the middle of the Meribah, the RIB. That's the term for a quarrel. In fact, that's used in just a few words later for the quarrel, for the reeb, because of the reeb of the sons of Israel, and because they tested. There it is, nasa, because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? They were questioning, is God even in this? And so these two place names, now let's come back to the psalm that mentions these names again. Today, if you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, as in the day of Massah in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me. They tried me, though they had seen my work. And the warning that's being given here in the psalm is, don't you do today what they did back then. They tested me. There's that nasa again. They tested me, they tried me, though they had seen my work. And so they had seen God's work. They saw my work in the wilderness, in the giving of the water to get there. They had gone through the Red Sea. They had seen God's work time and time again. And now the writer today is saying, don't you do the same thing? Now, the readers of the psalm had not seen those things happen in the wilderness. They'd read about it, but they hadn't seen that. But they had seen the works that were described back in verses 4 and 5. You've seen my work in the depths of the earth. You've seen my work in the mountains. Look how high, look how low, look at the sea, look at the dry land. I made all of that. You saw my handiwork. So therefore, you've seen my work as well. And don't you Can I take it from the psalmist and then apply it now to the 21st century reader? Don't you harden your heart just like they did way back then. Don't you test the Lord. Don't you say, well, I haven't seen those things, so therefore no, because you have seen God's handiwork even today, because it remains even today. Verse 10, for 40 years I loathed that generation and said they are a people who err in their heart and they do not know my ways. Therefore, here's the big therefore in the psalm, therefore I swore on my anger, truly they shall not enter into my rest. So the psalm ends with a warning. However, the writer of the epistle to the Hebrews in Hebrews chapters 3 and 4 picks up on this whole section really. And he picks up on it and he quotes it, and then he makes application to his day, which as we look over his shoulder, I think we can look over his shoulder and make application as well to our own day. So here's Hebrews chapter 3. Not going to read the whole 2 chapters because there's a lot there. But beginning verse 17, and with whom, and he's just quoted the section that we read, and with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So notice, they sinned, they were disobedient, and so the writer to the Hebrews sums up, so we see that they were not able to enter what? To enter the rest. Back then, the rest was referring to going into the promised land. We see that they were not able to enter because of unbelief, and because of their unbelief, they died in the wilderness. The next generation entered in, but they died in the wilderness. And so the issue is, they had unbelief. Don't you have the same unbelief? Because that could get in the way of you entering God's rest. Move to chapter 4, beginning in verse 1, therefore. And therefore is there for a reason. It's there because this is the conclusion. Therefore, let us fear, if while a promise remains of entering his rest. Now, that's not entering necessarily into the land of Canaan, because this promise that's given in Psalm 95 was written a long time after the Israelites had gone into Canaan. So he says, therefore, let us fear, if while a promise remains of entering his rest, any one of you may seem to have come short of it. For indeed we have had good news preached to us, just as they also, but the word they heard, the they is back then in the Old Testament period, the word they heard did not profit them because it was not united by faith in those who heard. And so the warning is, you have had a message preached to you in faith. Your message in faith wasn't just about getting to the promised land. It was about getting to the ultimate promised land. It was about trusting in the one that God sent, his Messiah, his chosen one, his anointed one, who died for sin and who rose again, and in whom you can believe, in whom you can trust, so that you can enter into God's rest, so that you can enter into that place of perfect rest. We come down to verse 8. For if Joshua had given them rest, remember, Joshua did take them into the promised land, but that wasn't the ultimate rest. That was sort of a temporary thing. Why do I say it's temporary? Because they eventually got removed from the promised land. But so if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. The he isn't Joshua, the he is the psalmist. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. Now, we're not talking about just the Sabbath day. We're talking about what the Sabbath day represents, a completion of the work of God. Can I say it this way? That takes us home. Verse 10, for the one who has entered his rest has himself also rested from his works. If you've come to the Lord, if you've trusted in him, then you can rest as God did from his. Remember what Jesus said on the cross? He said, it is finished. The work is done, completed, and then he died. But he didn't say dead. He rose again from the dead. So he entered into a rest, which means we can enter into a rest. Therefore, verse 11, therefore let us be diligent to enter that rest, the rest that Jesus provides, so that no one will fall through following the same example of disobedience. And so Joshua had given a temporary rest, but there remains for us a more permanent rest, signified by that whole Sabbath idea. Remember how God worked and then he rested? And Jesus worked, and now you can rest. But notice how it says in verse 11, therefore let us be diligent to enter that rest. In other words, can I say it this way? Work to enter that rest. Labor to enter that area of non-laboring. Work hard to trust in him so that you trust in the work that he did, not your work, but his. Be diligent to enter into that rest so that no one will fall through following the same example of disobedience where they didn't believe and so they failed to enter in. Don't you disbelieve, and instead you enter into that rest that God has provided for you.